All right. So we have a very special guest this afternoon, this evening. We have the one and only Miss Lauren Lucretia Moniqua Allgood. What's going
Love
on?
it.
How you
How
doing?
are ya?
I
I'm
am
doing well. Thanks so much for having me.
it's a blessing and a privilege to spend this time with you. So the reason why I brought you on is because I wanted to be an encouragement to many teachers like myself who have to teach the exceptional ed, the gifted students, the
Mhm.
higher order thinkers, higher level thinkers. And sometimes we miss the mark when helping these kids. And because
Yeah.
that's what your expertise is, we wanted to pick your brain a little bit and hopefully encourage a lot of the teachers as they're over the summer planning, getting ready to go back next year to figure out how to be the best teacher they can be. So just tell me this, how does a kid get labeled? I don't know if label's the right word. How do you get classified as gifted?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer is kind of convoluted because it's different based on what district, what school they go to, like that kind of thing. A kid could meet all of the criterias in one district and then they move and they don't meet the criteria for intellectual giftedness because it varies from state to state, from district to district. Really, in the state of Tennessee, the way that the way that it is defined is like an intellectual. I'm going to read it for a second. Intellectual abilities like creativity and potential for achievement that are so outstanding that the child's needs exceed what could be met in the regular classroom. In fact,
Mm,
it even like goes so far to say that it adversely affects their educational performance and requires like a specifically design instruction or support services um,
wow.
for their intellectual needs to be met. So that for the state of Tennessee is kind of the definition. Now, most of like the information that I have about qualifying is from Metro. Um, and for our district, when you qualify, usually there's some sort of like prerequisite, like in middle school we use TCAP. If a
Mhm.
kid scores well on TCAP, then their name is kind of recommended by the district, and then they go and they take a different level, which is um, there are a lot of different tests that can be used. We use a test called the COGAT, and it's a really interesting test. It's really rigorously timed, and it has like a lot of analogy questions, like a lot of questions that you've never had a test like that before. Like it even has questions about like if you folded a piece of paper like this, and then like this, and then like this, and then you
Mm.
punched a hole in it right here, what would the piece of paper look like when you unfolded it? You know, like kind of
Right.
questions like that. Some people use yeah completely non-verbal, like all kind of pictures and like that kind of reasoning tests. So it just kind of varies district by district. In Metro, you can also, a teacher could recommend for a kid to go through like the whole S team process. But the
Mm.
truth is that you really don't see that happen very often because that's a lot of work on the teacher, and teachers are busy, and so it's really tricky for them to go through that whole process of going through the S team, showing that there's an adverse effect, and going through the whole full battery
Yeah.
of giftedness. So usually when a kid's like recommended through the district and like we give them like one little test, usually they aren't considered like gifted. They're just considered like academically talented. But if they go through the whole like full battery of psychological testing, that's when they get that gifted designation.
Gotcha. It's funny because my oldest son is considered gifted. And when he was, I want to say 4, maybe 5, he was getting ready to go into kindergarten. His birthday is late, is November. And so we didn't want him to go to kindergarten when he was already reading. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, so we went through the process to get him considered certified gifted so we can get him bumped up to first grade, because to go to kindergarten would have been literally a waste of time.
Hmm.
And there was so much paperwork that we had to take even to the daycare, and the daycare had to fill out all this paperwork. And I think what happened was they got overwhelmed with how much paperwork it was. So they just marked some answers. And once they marked the answers by the calculation process, they couldn't take my son to the next level of testing for the IQ because he didn't score high enough on that thing. And I'm like, so what we did is we had him tested by a psychologist, and she certified him as gifted and said, "This is what I recommend you do when you get to school. Immediately request an S team and go through that process." So we did that, and so by Thanksgiving break, the principal agreed to move him to first grade. It was like literally they're learning b, k, and he's
Yeah.
reading, and I'll never forget we went for the way his school set it up was they would bring the kids in before kindergarten, and they would give them like a quick assessment, and that way they can learn what groups to put the kids in.
Mhm.
So he sits down in the library, and the teacher says, "Okay, I want you to count from 0 to as high as you can go, and when you feel like you can't go anymore, you can stop." So again,
I know
he's
where this
5.
is headed. Yeah.
Right, he's 5 years old. So he goes, "I can count to 1,000,000." And she smiled, be polite. She goes, "Well, just do the best you can." And I'm thinking, please don't ask him to count to 1,000,000 because I want to go home.
3
So
hours later.
right.
Yeah.
So he gets to like 260 something, and she goes, "Okay, you can stop. That's good. Like, that's enough. You've proven, most of the kids, we're
Mhm.
thinking you're gonna get to 15, 16, and then okay, that's all you got. That's enough."
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
so, and then, even with the psychologist, she was explaining certain things, and we'll get further into that with you as well about how even raising a child that is gifted, sometimes you run into issues as a parent that will make you want to strangle your child, just like the teacher may want to strangle that child. It's like, oh my gosh,
Mhm.
why are you like this? And it's because of the way their minds work.
Yeah.
And some of them are very unique individuals. I'm thinking he got it from his papa.
Oh, sure.
Alright, so you have
Yeah.
been teaching for a while. Have you always taught the academically gifted, or have other areas of expertise as well?
Yeah, I actually started out as a math teacher. So I taught about 9 years of math. And then I was kind of like looking for a change because I had always taught seventh and eighth grade. There are only so many times that you can like teach how to solve equations before you're like, I could use a challenge.
Mhm.
And so, living in Nashville, we have Vanderbilt actually has one of the most incredible training programs for teachers who want to teach gifted kids. They have a whole, like, they actually even have like incredible camps for gifted and advanced kids. And it's so incredible to just get to be here in this city and learn from like experts that you
Mm.
read about in books that are being cited. You're like, oh, I took that class from this leader in the field. And
Right.
so yeah, I got to spend a summer it studying at Vanderbilt, and that's how I got my certification to teach gifted kids. And so I've been doing that, I think, for 6 years now, and it's been so much fun
Yeah.
and challenging too, because I think like and we'll get into some myths, about a little later. But I think one of the myths for teachers is that a lot of times the teachers are like, "Oh, you just have all the good kids,"
Right, right.
and that's not true. And
Mm,
that's what also causes a problem with identification. And we realize that we have an identification problem
mm,
in Nashville. And to tell you the truth, most districts have an identification problem where the truth is we're identifying like wealthier kids, like you just spoke about. You think about all of the things that you had to do to get your son tested,
right.
and to advocate for him and that kind of thing. If you and your wife were working several different jobs, and didn't have the ability to go and take it, and didn't have the money to take him for testing, and all of this kind of stuff, there's no way
Mm,
he would have been able to to do that. And so we really see like an under identification for some minority groups, like especially Black kids, especially Hispanic kids, definitely kids who don't speak English as their first language. We really see an under identification of those kind of kids. And so that comes from so many different things. it comes from the kind of tests that we choose. It comes from using TCAP sometimes as a gatekeeper for identification. Like you think about at one of the I guess the most enlightening things about my journey was as a gifted teacher is that I had my first year I had 6 different schools that I was at.
Wow.
And so one of my schools had 100 kids in, our gifted talented program. One of my schools had 2 kids in the gifted talented
Two. So you
program.
went from 100 and something to two.
hmm
Wow.
So there's clearly some identification problem. Well, once you start going into it and you realize, like, oh, TCAP is one of the ways that we recommend kids for further testing. Well, it makes sense because at the school that had 100 kids, like the teachers were incredible. They had been there, they were really, I think the lowest amount of years of experience one of them had was 5 years. That was the teacher with the least experience
Mm,
versus other school. And I mean, obviously they had some incredible teachers as well, but they also, like, my kids didn't have a math teacher all year. So
wow.
tell me how they're going to really excel at TCAP if they don't have a, like a teacher.
Mm,
And so that's just like one of the many, routes where it's like, that's probably not going to be a fair way to assess them,
mhm.
in getting that identification. And so it's just, yeah, it's a really multifaceted problem that I think luckily, the good news is that a lot of districts are now aware of their problem and are working on ways to use multiple measures, not just one IQ test, boom, do it and get, the kids
Right.
in, the kids out, where they're looking at a lot of different ways to measure a kid. And even some districts have gone to what are called school-based norms, which mean, like, at this school we have a ton of high achievers, so really let's look at who is within this school, let's look at their multiple measures and see who really is still having that adverse effect.
Mm,
And then let's look at this lower performing school that might not have as many of the benefits as this other school, and let's see who really needs advanced work and who needs, acceleration, and who needs a gifted classroom, so that it's not 100 kids at this school are getting
yeah.
pulled for a program and 2 kids at this school are getting pulled for a program. Does
Yeah,
that make sense?
yeah, absolutely. And it's funny, I don't think I've ever asked you. I just assumed that you were considered a gifted person yourself. Were you certified as seriously because you're very, very smart.
Oh, thanks.
No, I'm being totally serious. Look, my
Yeah.
fingers are not crossed or anything. But I
Yeah,
mean,
so they don't give us a test in order to be a gifted, talented teacher. We don't have to take an
no, I'm
IQ
saying
test,
when you were
but
young, were
yeah, I
you
was.
okay?
Mhm.
That's
And
what I
and
figured.
that's one of the reasons why this job appealed to me so much, was because I remember how much I looked forward to that one day a week of
Mm,
going to my gifted talented class, and how it was just such, like, an escape from the classroom, where, like, I just remember being in elementary school and being like, okay, I know the answer, but I probably shouldn't raise my hand because I've been raising my hand all day. Whereas I shouldn't act curious. The kids will, the other kids will be like, shut up.
right.
And so it was fun to go to a place where we were all curious, and we were really all like, it was fun to
Hungry for
be,
knowledge. Yeah,
yeah,
it's cool to be smart, you know? Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. So
You know that.
my
It's cool
thought
to be smart.
process was on point, and for everyone who watches this, I want them to know that our nickname at school was Brains and Brawn. And I hate that they called you Braun,
I know, it's crazy.
because I mean my muscles are bigger than yours, but for some reason they
It's
recognize my
crazy.
giftedness.
I know.
Yeah, but
Well,
it's good to know that I was correct. All right, so we were talking about
probably
misconceptions.
because you're gifted too, right?
I'm thinking so. We were mentioning misconceptions a second ago. So tell me a
hmm
couple of the misconceptions that
Yeah.
teachers might have concerning gifted students.
Yeah. I think one is definitely that they are the good kids. And when you really look at, like, a list of gifted characteristics, you can see how it's not always going to be the, kids that are sitting in their seat, because it's kids who are curious, kids who can't stop talking, kids who can't stop asking questions, kids who are super, like, intense,
Mm,
kids who, like, can't understand why these other kids are being slow to learn something that they learned like this. And sometimes like another one is like humor and a keen sense of humor. So a lot of times it can actually be like your class clowns who are making these like intellectual jokes that the teacher is laughing at but shouldn't. It's like, oh, stop. It can really be like one characteristic a lot of times of gifted kids is a strong sense of justice. So it could be that kid that's like, whoa, 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 why'd you call me out when that kid did the same thing? And so
Mm,
it is not always the most well behaved kids in the
right,
classroom. And
right.
so that's one misconception. I think
Yeah.
another misconception is that they'll be okay if you don't teach to their level. um, I think, and I love sports, you love sports. I think one thing that we do well is when a kid is gifted at a sport or at athletics, we do a great job of accelerating them. We would never, if you were coaching a basketball team and you were coaching to win, you never take your best basketball player, and every day at practice tell them to go and work with the lowest performing kid on
Mm,
your basketball team. You would never spend every practice doing that, right?
right,
But we
right.
do that with gifted kids all of the time. Hey, I need you to go peer tutor this kid because he doesn't get it. You would never do that with your best athlete, you
Mm,
know and so I think that's one misconception, that we think like they'll be fine, just let them peer tutor. I think, yeah, thinking about that is that they always love to do work and
mhm.
they don't. And so many times I see us, and I speak, like, I'm even talking about myself before I got this job as a gifted, talented teacher. I can see how I've made some of these mistakes
Mhm.
of like a kid finishes early and you say, oh, great, I'm so glad. Here, do this worksheet now. Well, guess what that reads? That reads like underachievement and kids being like, "Well, I'm not about to work fast
Right.
this time because I
Right,
know if
right.
I'm going to
Getting
work fast,
punished for
she's
being
just going
good
to
at
give me
something.
another."
Right.
Right. And so if it's just like, "Okay, great. I'm so glad you finished early. Can you please sweep the classroom?" Who's going to finish early? Who's going to
Mm.
be like pumped and jazzed to do their work? Like that's how we breed, like underachievement and kids like not wanting to finish early. But if I've already, like, as a teacher, if I've already pre-tested my kids and I know, oh, you know what? I know Coach Cody's going to get this way faster than a lot of the other kids in the class. So I need to go ahead and at the beginning, I need to, change his assignment so that he is, it's going to take him the same 60 minutes that it's going to take the rest of the kids.
Right.
Um, and not, that doesn't mean the rest of the kids are doing 30 problems. I'm going to give Columbus 60 problems. That's not what that means. That means like I am going to make I'm going to make it more complex. I'm going to make his assignment more rigorous. So his 30 problems might look different from the rest of the kids' 30 problems, even if it's the same standard.
Mhm.
So that you have work to be excited about. Um, and so that the other kids, like, they might not even realize like that you have different work than them because
Right.
you finished at the same time as them. Does that?
Yeah, so I'm thinking like does because I think you and I had this conversation before. A lot of times when kids who are gifted, they finally struggle at something, it's very frustrating to them
Yeah.
because they're so used to everything coming easy. So now I give you work that is a little bit tougher. Do you find that you have more, butting heads at that moment, or do they most of the time do they step up to that challenge?
That is a tricky question. And it kind of depends when they see that, when and how often they have like tough challenges academically. Because if it doesn't come till later, then it's going to be hard. And these are kids who already have like intense self-awareness,
Mm,
intense like emotions. There is a lot of intensity when it comes to gifted kids and their emotions about themselves, their emotions about other people. And especially when we tell them, you are so smart, you are so gifted, and we make them that sort of like a fixed thing, this is where growth mindset comes in, because if that's how they're praised in kindergarten and first grade and second grade, oh my gosh, you can already read, you are so smart.
Mm,
And you don't make it sound like, wow, you worked really hard to figure out how to read. Even that growth mindset versus fixed mindset can play such an important role with them, because they realize, like, what if I go to my first advanced class and I'm not the smartest one? Does that mean I'm not gifted anymore? Does that mean I'm not smart anymore?
mm,
um Whereas, what they might not realize is that, like, a lot of those kids have been having to study way harder, having to do their homework way more consistently. And so when they are then challenged, sometimes in middle school, that's the first time that they have really been challenged
yeah,
academically.
yeah.
And in that point, yeah, they're going to throw it up and they're going to be like, nope, because if the teacher gives a hard assignment and they're not sure that they can be really successful, what's going to be easier to say, I didn't try and not try and save face, or to say, I tried really hard and I didn't do well?
Mm,
They're not going to try, and they're just going to, so that they can say, I didn't try on that.
wow.
And
Yeah.
that's, yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned about the intensity, emotional intensity and things of that nature. Why do you think gifted kids struggle so much with socialization? Like some of them struggle, their social lives are not their strong suits.
Yeah. I think, so I think sometimes it's like hubris, like, oh, look how smart I am, look how fast I learned this. And sometimes honestly it's just that, and then needing to learn, like, somebody is going to be better than you at something. And sometimes it takes a little while to figure that out.
Mm.
And so I think sometimes it's just the feeling of superiority, and, like, people not wanting to be around that. And to be honest, like, I think that, it's sometimes that, like, I'm special, and so I don't have to make friends with these peers of mine.
Peasant learners.
Right, right. But, so I mean, that part of that is that some of it is like such intense, like, self-awareness of, like, I can't stop being curious and I don't care. Like, I am going to learn, and I don't care if that makes my classmates annoyed, that I'm going to raise my hand and ask more questions and ask more questions and ask more questions, even though the teacher says, like, we can go to recess as soon as we finish this lesson. There's, like, the gifted kids, it's like, but wait,
Yeah.
can
Get,
I ask,
get
what about
recess. I'm gonna read at recess anyway. So
right,
so you said the Pythagorean theorem is
right.
what now?
And the kids are like, oh, dude, she said that we could go to recess.
I'm beating him up first. I'm the first one gonna beat him up.
Right. And so, yeah, so they're, yeah, insatiable curiosity. They don't care. Like, they'd rather learn than be popular with their peers.
Yeah. I thought about something too. I used to have to console my son in like second grade. He would be so frustrated because the teacher wouldn't call on him, because she knew he already knew the answer. But he wanted to show, I know this. Well, I'm not picking you because I know you know it. Let me give another student a chance to answer. And so I used to try to explain to him, well, son, you got to understand, she knows you got it. She's trying to give another kid an opportunity as well. But that's not fair because she never calls me though. And so the frustration sets in, and you never want to just go, I don't care no more then. So, what can a teacher do to make a gifted student feel more accepted in the class?
Yeah. So I think like, this is another reason why it's not always the easiest job, is because you have a classroom full of kids like that. And so one of the first things, like, if I have the whole class full of, like, gifted, talented kids, is I explain, like, the actual math of it, and of, like, hey guys, I want to give everyone a voice, and some people are shyer than others, and there are 25 of you guys. Who can tell me what fraction of the time I'm going to call on you? And they realize, like, 1/25th? And, like, that's like a nightmare to them.
You
But,
giving me
like,
these hard math problems this late at night.
stop it. But, like, once when they realize, like, yeah, I'm going to ask 25 questions, and you might, like, I'm only going to call on you once. If I'm trying to, like, hear from everybody. And I think like explaining like the math of it sometimes does make sense to those type of
Mm,
learners. I think that might not make sense to a second grader though. And it might be a situation where like you get a whiteboard and if they just want to prove it to their teacher that they know the answer, write it down on the whiteboard, show it to your teacher. She knows, she gives you the thumbs up, and then she can call on, somebody else.
right.
Um, something like that. But I also think, and this is going to be a real struggle, this coming up year because of COVID and everything. But like when we work in groups, you have to think about like if they're in groups, then you get to talk a lot more of the time, right? So instead of a full class, only getting to talk like 1/25th of the time, if you're in groups of three, then you should get to talk 1/3 of the time, And so that gives more voice to those sort of
Mm,
kids, is then they get to talk, they get to tell their opinion a lot more. And kind of like going back to that grouping thing that we were talking about even earlier, a lot of research has shown that like it's not good for anybody when you take your highest kid and you pair them with your lowest kid, because the highest kid is like going to get frustrated and like they're not going to be learning. The lowest kid is going to be like, why is that kid understanding things so quickly? Whereas if you would, if you pair a couple of higher kids together, then they end up like really usually like asking each other questions that help them to grow. Because
mm,
kind of like one of the things that I had to learn was about how important questioning is. You can't just pop off like whatever question comes to the top of your mind, because a lot of times those aren't going to be those higher level thinking questions.
mhm.
You have to actually write them and plan them into your lessons, because as soon as a question is answered, like the thinking's over. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But like if your question is going to keep on making the kids think, keep on making the kids think, then the learning isn't over.
Mhm.
The thinking isn't over. But those questions take a lot of planning. They don't, I mean, maybe for you, they
Yeah.
come right off the bat, those higher level things. But, for a lot of teachers, they have to be planned, and you really have
Right.
to like think through, I'm going to ask this question. This is going to be our guiding question today. This is what I'm going to ask here, and really plan out like those questions for
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
you're going
And
to teach your
like you said,
class.
it's good to write those questions down because you'll forget them, believe it, in the heat of the lesson, or
Yes.
and you're like, I should have asked that question. And it does,
Mhm.
it starts to build and build and build, and then boom, it's like, wow, we went from this question and now we end up way over here. And
Yeah.
now and then they're at home telling their parents what they learned in Encore that day, and like, oh my God, I learned this and this and this. Dad, did you know this and this and this? Because like you said about the students with the justice, I'll never forget, my son told me he was like 6 years old, I think, at this time. And, and I didn't know if he was being a smart aleck with me or not, but he was like, Dad, do you realize that in order for you to make change in this world, sometimes you got to break the rules?
Yes.
And I was like, dude, that's deep. Now go do what I told you to do. Go do what I told you before I do one
No,
of these kung fu moves on you.
and that is actually like one of the kind of like gifted characteristics, is like that flexible thought process of, why is this a rule, and is this one of the rules that I should break?
Right.
It is, I
Is
mean, it
is it
just is.
worth the consequence? Hmm.
But you have to think about, so many incredible changes that have come from breaking the rules, that
Right.
have come from questioning the authorities and say, why is this like
Mm.
this? This
Yeah.
isn't right, and absolutely, that makes total sense that that would be something he would say.
All right. So what's one book? Now I know you have plenty, but what's one book that you
Okay.
would highly recommend every teacher read that has to help gifted students?
Mm, let's see. You would say for teachers. What?
For teachers, right.
So I'm not gonna, let me look it up to make sure I get the name right, because all the gifted books, they have like really long
Si-
titles and that kind of stuff.
Long and similar and
Right.
long names.
Like very like clinical names, but
Well,
I
while you're
believe
searching that, because I
okay.
know you have the brilliant brain, I'm gonna make you
Thanks.
multitask. So while you're searching for that book title, I want you to answer this question. What do you find you enjoy most about teaching students that are academically gifted?
Okay. So I'll tell you the book. See, this is a
You
long
found it
title.
already.
Okay.
See, boom.
Yeah. Teaching gifted kids in today's classroom, strategies and techniques every teacher can use, and it's by Susan Weinbrenner.
Hold on, hold on. That long thing was the name of the book?
Yes,
Okay, say it one more
that's
time.
why I had to look it
Say that one more time. I thought you read the first chapter. That was just the title? Alright, read
Yeah.
that title one more time.
Okay, teaching gifted kids in today's classroom. That's the main title, and then it's
Okay.
like colon.
Colon.
It had
Got
to
it,
have a
okay.
colon.
You see, if you'd
Colon.
have thrown the colon in there, you wouldn't have went over my head. Okay.
Strategies and techniques every teacher can use. And what I like about this book is it isn't text on every page. A lot of them are like printables that you can like
Mm,
put on the copy machine and make. It's like got menus that like where you can do tic-tac-toe menus with your with your students where they can choose like three different things, or yeah, that like those kind of, it's very teacher friendly.
and the
um
author one more time.
Susan Weinbrenner, and then the other, it actually has two authors. And oh man, I feel like I'm going to mispronounce this. Dina Brules, Brulles, and I can send you a
You
link
said
to
Dino?
Dina.
Dina, okay.
Hmm.
I'll look it up and post a picture of it,
Perfect.
for the viewers to see, but yeah. So
Yeah.
you heard it from the great and wonderful Miss Allgood. Every teacher that's teaching gifted kids needs to read that book, and
Yeah.
who doesn't have a gifted kid in their class? We all
Right.
do. So I'm
And that's
thinking
the
maybe
truth.
that's
Yeah.
something I need to be reading this summer.
Yeah. Well, and for parents too, like there are so many great like websites and so many different, man, there's like, you can make this statement about anything, but if you've met a gifted kid, you've met one gifted kid. Like they are so, they're so different. You could have a twice exceptional kid, which could be a kid with multiple diagnoses, one of, giftedness, but one of autism, or one of ADHD and giftedness. And so
Mm,
you have, all, you have that. You also have those kids who are like super intense emotionally, like, you as a parent might, want to explore that route, or you might want to explore this or that and that kind of thing. So, yeah, I think the NAGC, the National Association for Gifted Children, they have so many, yeah, just resources for parents, for teachers, to be able to do that, do it well. And I just think, yeah, like we talked about, kind of like with sports, you you have to think like, would I do this with a really gifted athlete on my team? And if you wouldn't, then you like, why would you do that with a gifted kid in your
right,
classroom?
right,
I think about like high diving, okay? Like I don't know much about it, but let's say you have a kid that is like really a really gifted diver and has been doing high diving and that kind of thing, but the rest of your team is like they've only done the low diving, diving board. You wouldn't then make that, incredible athlete like, no, 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 all the rest of us are on this low diving board.
right. Come
You
on
need
back
to do
down
that.
here with us.
Right. You wouldn't do that, especially when in 2 weeks you're going to go to a competition where they have to dive off the hat. Like don't do that. You wouldn't tell a kid running a 5 minute mile in your PE class, like, hey, buddy, slow down. You're leaving the rest of the kids behind.
Right. You know me, I'd be like, "Step
Um,
it up the rest of you. What's wrong with you?
Coach
What's
Cook, you
wrong
run a
with
4 minute mile.
what's wrong with you? You think that dude's fast? Wait till I put my shorts on."
Right, right.
Alright,
Oh,
so
left my shorts at home. Hate it, kids.
that's the
Yeah.
strategy I use every week. Alright, so let me see if you
Mhm.
actually were paying attention to me because I asked you another
Oh, no.
question.
Okay. The other question was, I forgot.
Oh, you
No. Oh, what did I like? No, I got it.
forgot. Okay.
What did I like? I One thing that I just love is, while there are like specific standards that I have to teach and that kind of thing, I'm a very competitive person. You know this. And so when I was a classroom teacher, knowing that I was have these standards to teach, knowing that it would be tested at the end of this school year, like I could get really focused on, oh, I better have the best scores in the building. Like that kind of competitiveness within me. And so it's been pretty freeing to know like that I can sort of follow my kids' passions. And if like I see that they're passionate about space, then we're gonna do a unit about space. And like I'm gonna learn stuff. And that's been so fun is
Mm.
to like get to do units like where I didn't know that like if you went into a black hole, which you never would, but if you did, you would literally be spaghettified, which means like your body would be like into spaghetti. Like
Hold
I
on,
didn't know
hold
that.
on. Do that sound effect one more time.
Yeah, it's a one time only sound effect. But like, yeah, upon like entering, yeah, like upon getting close, and I'm not, like an astrophysicist. So if there are like any astrophysicists watching, I might have said something wrong. But like spaghettification, like that's crazy. That's something that like when I taught 7th and 8th grade math, I knew all of that math. And yes, occasionally like a kid would ask me a question that I'd have to think about, like, oh, why is that? But teaching like a classroom full of gifted kids, like I have learned so much from
Mm.
them, from the questions that they asked, and like from having to say I don't know the answer, but we'll talk about it next week. I'm going to
Man,
figure out
that
who I
is
can
a
ask.
great question. You know what? Write that one down so we don't forget to look it up. I used to do that all the time.
Yeah.
Right? You know
And
what?
so
Write that. That is a brilliant question. Right? Matter of fact, give yourself an extra 100 for the day. Everybody, I got a question too. No, no, no. That's all we got for the day.
no, just one.
All right. So
um,
we're gonna finish with this last statement.
okay.
You have one sentence to explain to teachers in one sentence. Or I won't say explain. Give the
Okay.
teachers the greatest advice you can give about teaching the gifted student in one sentence.
Okay. I'm going to tell you. This is kind of like an easy trick. It's not the end all be all, but
Okay.
um, HOTS, not MOTS, which is like higher order thinking skills. HOTS, not MOTS, more of the same. Okay. And like for an easy higher order thinking is just to add the phrase, like the construct of that and. So instead of saying, like, this is probably a bad example, but like if a teacher was going to say, okay, write a word problem for an addition problem. Instead of saying that, like bump the complexity of it by saying, um, write an addition, write a word problem for an addition problem that deals with 2-digit numbers and has a sum of 55.
Mm.
So, because gifted kids will use their giftedness to do the least amount of work if you let them. So they'll write, I ate an apple, my mom ate an apple, we ate 2 apples.
How
Done.
many apples did we eat?
Right, right. And so they will do the bare minimum if you let them.
Mm.
So, if and that probably wasn't a good, thing to start
So I'm going
probably
to
start off with
say
this.
the sentence that you were trying to say. See if I'm good with this
Okay.
as your student.
Okay. Okay.
Is to word your questions in a way that it will challenge them to give their best answer.
Mhm. Yeah, and a lot of times just adding that and a something something that will blah 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 and da 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 just make automatically can bump up the level of what you're asking them to do,
I like that. I like that.
and that's even something you can use in PE.
You know what? Stop giving me more work to do. Come on. You want me to
Yeah,
run
well,
this 5-minute mile or what?
design. Yeah, like you could tell your kids like design, a 5-minute yoga session that
That,
incorporates these moves and does you know
and
makes
you can
you
do them with only
sweat for
one
3
arm.
minutes. Yeah, right.
Which of these can you do with one arm? Well,
Yeah.
I truly do appreciate your time. And like I said,
Thanks.
I hope this will be an encouragement to a lot of teachers, especially everybody in the teacher group that will get a chance to see it. And who knows who
Yeah,
else will see it. But
I
you've been
know.
awesome as always. It's a joy and an honor to spend this moment with you. So have a
Yay.
blessed
Thank you for having me.
evening. Of course. Have a great evening.
You too.